Every evening, just before sunset, Liam walked into the park and sat on the same wooden bench. He always had a bright smile on his face, as if he were waiting for someone special. His small hands clutched a worn-out baseball, and his eyes scanned the park with excitement. He seemed like any other 10-year-old boy, happy and full of energy. But there was something different about him, something that made people glance at him with curiosity before looking away. Liam wasn't waiting for a friend. He wasn't waiting for his mother or a babysitter. He was waiting for his father. As the golden sunlight faded and the sky turned orange, Liam started talking. His voice was cheerful, full of laughter and excitement, as if he were having a real conversation with someone sitting beside him. He would nod, listen, and sometimes pause as if hearing a response. His little legs swung back and forth, and he held the baseball tightly, pretending to toss it to someone. Then he would look up and smile, as if the invisible person had caught it and was throwing it back. People walking by often slowed down, watching him for a moment. Some parents whispered to each other, wondering if the boy was okay. Others simply shook their heads and moved on. No one ever stopped to ask him why he was sitting alone, talking to thin air. No one wanted to disturb his little world. Daniel, a middle-aged man who visited the park every evening, noticed Liam right away. He first saw him a few weeks ago and thought the boy was just waiting for someone. But when days passed and no one ever showed up, Daniel started paying attention. He saw how the boy laughed, nodded, and talked as if someone was truly there. It was strange and a little sad. One evening, Daniel sat on a bench nearby and watched quietly. He didn't want to stare, but he couldn't ignore the boy's actions. Liam tossed the ball again, smiling as it landed on the grass. He ran to pick it up, then turned back and said, "Good throw, Dad." Daniel felt a strange feeling in his chest. There was no one with the boy, no father, no one playing catch with him. And yet, Liam was acting as if there was. Daniel frowned, trying to understand. Was the boy just playing make-believe, or was there something else going on? The wind blew gently, rustling the leaves in the trees. The park was peaceful, filled with the laughter of children playing on the swings and the distant sound of dogs barking. But Daniel couldn't take his eyes off Liam. The boy's happiness seemed so real, yet there was an emptiness around him that Daniel couldn't ignore. A woman passed by with her dog and glanced at Liam. She sighed and shook her head. "That poor boy," she muttered to herself, but Daniel heard her. He turned to her. "Do you know him?" he asked. The woman hesitated, then nodded. "I see him here almost every day, always sitting in the same spot, always talking to someone who isn't there." She sighed again. "He's a foster kid, lives in the group home near the park." Daniel's heart tightened. A foster kid. That explained why no parent ever came for him. But it didn't explain why Liam sat there every night pretending to talk to his father. "Why does he do that?" Daniel asked, his voice softer now. The woman shrugged. "Maybe it makes him feel better. Maybe he just misses someone." Then she gave Daniel a small smile and walked away, leaving him with more questions than answers. Daniel turned back to Liam, who was still talking happily. The boy's voice was filled with excitement as he gestured toward the empty space beside him. Daniel didn't know why, but his heart ached. He had seen many lonely people in his life, but something about this boy's loneliness was different. It wasn't just sadness, it was hope. Hope that someone would show up. Hope that a father's love would never truly fade. As the sun dipped lower, Liam stood up, dusted off his jeans, and stretched. He looked around, as if expecting someone to finally appear, but no one did. His smile wavered for just a second before he forced it back. Then, as if nothing was wrong, he turned and walked toward the exit, his small shoulders straight, his steps light. Daniel watched him go, his mind filled with thoughts he couldn't quite understand. Something about this boy touched him in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. And for the first time, Daniel had the strange feeling that this wasn't just a boy playing pretend. There was a story behind his actions, a story that Daniel suddenly wanted to uncover. Daniel couldn't get the boy out of his mind. That night, as he lay in bed, he kept thinking about Liam sitting on the bench, talking to an invisible father. The way the boy smiled, the way he laughed, it wasn't just a child playing make-believe. It felt real, like he truly believed someone was there with him. The next evening, Daniel returned to the park earlier than usual. He sat on a bench near Liam's spot, pretending to read a newspaper while keeping an eye on the boy. Just as expected, Liam arrived at the same time as before, wearing the same faded blue hoodie and carrying the same baseball. He looked around, his eyes filled with quiet excitement, then sat down. Within seconds, he started talking again. Daniel listened carefully. "You won't believe what happened today, Dad," Liam said, kicking his legs back and forth. "I got a gold star on my homework. Miss Taylor said I did great." There was a short pause, as if he were waiting for a response. Then he laughed. "Yeah, I know. I told you I was smart." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. The boy's voice was so full of joy, so full of love, but there was no one answering him. No one sitting beside him, no father smiling back at him. It was just Liam and his imagination. Liam picked up his baseball and tossed it toward the empty space next to him. The ball rolled onto the grass. He clapped his hands, pretending someone had caught it. "Good throw, Dad," he said happily. Daniel couldn't take it anymore. He had to know the truth. He stood up and slowly walked toward Liam. The boy didn't notice him at first. He was too busy in his imaginary conversation. Daniel cleared his throat. "Hey there, kid." Liam blinked and turned his head. His eyes widened slightly, surprised that someone was talking to him. He quickly looked to his side, as if checking to see if his dad was still there. Then he gave Daniel a polite smile. "Hi," he said. Daniel hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to scare the boy or make him uncomfortable, so he sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving space between them. "I see you here every evening," Daniel said gently. "You like this park, huh?" Liam nodded. "Yeah, it's my favorite place." Daniel glanced at the empty space beside Liam, then at the baseball lying on the grass. "You waiting for someone?" Liam's face brightened. "My dad," he said proudly. "He always meets me here after work." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He didn't know what to say. He already knew the truth. Liam's father wasn't coming. But the boy's smile was so full of hope, so full of certainty, that Daniel couldn't bring himself to say anything. Instead, he just nodded. "That's nice," he said softly. Liam picked up the baseball and held it in his lap. "He's really good at catch. Way better than me. But I'm getting better." Daniel forced a smile. "I bet you are." Liam looked toward the park entrance, his expression expectant. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the grass. Minutes passed, but no one came. Daniel watched as the boy's smile slowly faded. His fingers tightened around the baseball. His shoulders tensed. For a brief moment, he looked lost, like he was realizing something he didn't want to believe. But then, just as quickly, he put on his smile again. "He's probably late today," Liam said, mostly to himself. "But that's okay. He'll be here soon." Daniel swallowed hard. His heart ached for the boy. He wanted to say something, but what could he say? He didn't want to break the illusion Liam had built for himself. Instead, he just sat there, watching as the boy kept waiting for a father who would never come. The air grew colder as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Daniel sat beside Liam in silence, watching as the boy clutched his baseball, his eyes fixed on the park entrance. The quiet expectation in his expression made Daniel's chest ache. He wanted to say something, but he didn't know how to begin. Liam finally spoke, breaking the silence. "Do you have a dad?" he asked, turning to Daniel. Daniel hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I did," he said softly. He passed away a long time ago. Liam's fingers tightened around the baseball. He looked down, as if thinking about something, then glanced back up. Do you miss him? Daniel let out a slow breath. Yeah, he admitted. Every day. Liam nodded, as if he understood. He looked toward the empty spot beside him, his smile dimming just a little. My dad is gonna come, he said, his voice quiet but firm. He always does. Daniel didn't know what to say. He had already learned from the woman at the park that Liam was a foster child, that his real father wasn't coming back. And yet the boy sat here every evening, waiting, believing. It was both heartbreaking and unsettling. A few moments passed before Daniel finally spoke again. How long have you been coming here? Liam shrugged. A while. Daniel studied him carefully. And your dad? Does he ever talk to you? Liam's face brightened again. Yeah. He asks about my day. And we play catch. He always says he's proud of me. His voice was full of warmth, as if he truly heard those words every single day. Daniel swallowed. And what does he look like? Liam tilted his head slightly, as if trying to remember. Tall. He wears a suit because he's always coming from work. And he smells like minty gum. He smiled, then whispered, he's the best dad in the world. Daniel felt a strange chill run down his spine. Liam's words weren't just the imagination of a child missing his father. It was more than that. It was as if the boy had convinced himself that his father was truly there with him. Daniel glanced at the other park visitors. Families sitting together, children running, couples holding hands. No one seemed to notice the boy sitting alone, talking to someone who wasn't there. Something about it didn't feel right. Liam, Daniel said gently, where is your dad now? Liam's smile faltered for just a second. His fingers fidgeted with the seams of his hoodie. He's coming, he said after a pause. He always comes. Daniel saw the hesitation in his eyes, the tiny flicker of doubt hidden beneath the forced smile. He recognized that look, the way someone clings to a hope they know isn't real, because letting go would hurt too much. Before Daniel could say anything else, a voice called out in the distance. Liam, it's time to go. Daniel turned his head and saw a woman standing near the park entrance. She looked tired, her hands shoved into the pockets of a worn-out coat. Liam's shoulders tensed. For a moment, he didn't move. He stared at the woman, then back at the empty space beside him, as if trying to decide something. Then he turned to Daniel and gave him a small, almost secretive smile. That's my foster mom, he said. She doesn't know my dad visits me. Daniel's stomach twisted. He watched as Liam stood up, dusted off his jeans, and gave a little wave. Bye, mister, he said cheerfully. See you tomorrow. Daniel watched him walk away, his heart heavy with questions. Something was wrong. And for the first time, he felt like he needed to find out the truth. You said. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Liam. That night, as he lay in bed, the boy's words echoed in his mind. My dad visits me. He always comes. There was something unsettling about the way Liam had said it, something that didn't feel right. The next evening, Daniel returned to the park. He told himself he was just going for a walk, just getting fresh air. But deep down, he knew he was looking for Liam. And sure enough, right on time, the boy appeared. Liam walked straight to his usual bench, sat down, and smiled at the empty space beside him. Then, just like always, he started talking. Daniel hesitated before approaching. He didn't want to scare the boy or make him uncomfortable, but he needed to understand. He walked up slowly and sat on the other end of the bench. Hey, kid, Daniel said. Liam turned to him and grinned. Hi, mister. You're here again. Daniel nodded. Yeah. I like this park. He glanced at the empty space next to Liam. So, your dad's here too? Liam nodded happily. Yep. He just got here. He said work was busy today. Daniel swallowed hard. He had spent years working with people, reading their faces, listening to their words. And he could tell. Liam truly believed what he was saying. This wasn't just a game. This was real to him. Daniel cleared his throat. Liam, can I ask you something? The boy tilted his head. Sure. Daniel hesitated, then spoke carefully. When was the last time you saw your dad? Liam blinked. I see him all the time, he said, as if it was obvious. Every night. Right here. Daniel forced a small smile. I mean, before that. When was the last time you saw him? Outside the park. Liam looked down at his hands, rolling the baseball between his fingers. For the first time, he didn't answer right away. He seemed to be thinking, searching his memory. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, a long time ago. Daniel felt his heart tighten. Do you remember where? Liam hesitated again. His grip on the baseball tightened. I think. At home, he whispered, before I came to the foster house. Daniel exhaled slowly. Now he was sure. The boy's father wasn't coming. He had never been coming. Liam had created this illusion to protect himself from the truth. But why? Daniel didn't want to push too hard, so he changed the subject. So, what do you and your dad talk about? Liam brightened up again. Everything. School, baseball, my favorite TV shows. He paused, then whispered, sometimes, he tells me he misses me. A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. Liam continued, his voice full of quiet excitement. He says he's waiting for me. That one day we'll be together again. He says I just have to be patient. Daniel stared at the boy, his mind racing. Waiting for him. Together again. What did that mean? Something wasn't right. Liam was a foster child. His real father was gone. But somehow, the boy believed he was still out there, still talking to him. And now Daniel had a terrifying thought. Was someone feeding him these ideas? Was someone making Liam believe this? Daniel looked around the park, scanning the faces of strangers. He had a bad feeling, and for the first time, he wasn't just curious about Liam's story. He was afraid of what he might find. You said. Daniel couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. The way Liam spoke about his father, so certain, so convinced, didn't feel like the innocent imagination of a lonely boy. It felt like something more, something deeper, something dangerous. He watched as Liam continued talking to the empty space beside him, laughing, nodding, pausing as if listening to a real voice. Every now and then, he would glance toward the park entrance, his eyes filled with quiet hope. Daniel's mind raced. He needed answers. Liam, he said carefully, has your dad ever told you where he is? Liam's fingers played with the stitching on his baseball. He hesitated. He says he's close, he murmured. He says I'll see him soon. Daniel felt his breath catch. See him soon, he repeated. What does that mean? Liam shifted uncomfortably. He looked around as if making sure no one else was listening, then leaned in slightly. His voice dropped to a whisper. He's coming to get me. A chill shot through Daniel's body. Liam's face was filled with pure trust, pure belief. He says I just have to wait a little longer. That soon, we'll be together again. For real this time. Daniel's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a child pretending anymore. Someone was telling Liam these things. Someone was making him believe that his father was still out there, waiting for him. And the most terrifying part, Liam believed it. Daniel's pulse quickened. Liam, has your dad ever told you how he's going to find you? The boy nodded slowly. Yeah, he whispered. He told me to come here every night. He said one day, when the time is right, he'll be waiting for me. Daniel's hands clenched. His instincts were screaming now. This wasn't just a lonely child talking to a memory. Someone was watching him. Someone was waiting for him. Daniel scanned the park, his eyes darting from face to face. Families, couples, joggers, everyone looked normal. But that didn't mean anything. Liam had been coming here for weeks, waiting for a father who would never come. But what if someone else was coming instead? What if someone had been listening to Liam's stories, feeding him lies, making him believe his father was out there? And what if that person was planning to take him? Daniel's heart pounded. He had to do something. But he couldn't scare Liam. He needed to be careful. "Liam," Daniel said, keeping his voice calm, "if your dad ever tells you to go somewhere, anywhere, promise me you won't go alone." Liam frowned, confused. "Why?" Daniel forced a smile. "Because it's always safer to have a friend. You wouldn't want to miss him, right?" Liam seemed to think about it, then nodded. "Okay, I promise." Daniel let out a quiet breath. It wasn't enough, but it was something. He had to find out the truth, and he had to do it before it was too late. Daniel barely slept that night. His mind kept replaying Liam's words. "He's coming to get me." Someone had planted that idea in the boy's head. Someone had been making him believe his father was still out there, waiting for him. But why? And more importantly, who? The next evening, Daniel arrived at the park earlier than usual. He sat on a bench far from Liam's usual spot, hidden behind a tree, watching. If someone was watching Liam, then Daniel needed to watch them. Minutes later, Liam appeared. He walked straight to his bench, sat down, and smiled at the empty space beside him. Daniel held his breath. Liam started talking. "Hey, Dad, I knew you'd be here." Silence. Then Liam nodded, as if listening. "You did. That's great. I missed you too." Daniel clenched his fists. The boy wasn't just making things up. He was answering someone. Or worse, someone had trained him to respond this way. Daniel's eyes scanned the park. Families played, couples walked their dogs, kids ran around. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Then, movement. A man. He stood near the trees, not too far from Liam. Tall, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, his hands stuffed into his pockets. He wasn't walking, wasn't playing with a child. He was just standing there, watching. Daniel's stomach turned. The man's gaze stayed locked on Liam. Not in a casual way, not in the way strangers glance at people passing by. It was focused, intentional. He's waiting for something. Liam kept talking to his invisible father. He laughed softly, his small hands gripping the baseball in his lap. The man in the hoodie took a slow step forward. Daniel's pulse spiked. No. Then Liam did something that made Daniel's blood run cold. He looked toward the trees, his face lighting up, and he waved. Daniel's body tensed. The man in the hoodie hesitated, then lifted his hand in return. Liam turned back to his imaginary father. "Dad, I think I see you," he whispered excitedly. "Are you coming now?" The man took another step. Daniel shot up from the bench. His heart pounded as he moved quickly but carefully, keeping his eyes locked on Liam. He couldn't scare the boy. He couldn't cause panic. But he had to stop this. Liam still sat there, waiting. The man was getting closer. Daniel reached Liam just as the man took another step. "Hey, kid," Daniel said, forcing his voice to stay light. He sat beside Liam, blocking the boy's view of the trees. "How's it going?" Liam blinked up at him, surprised. "Oh, hi, mister. I think my dad is finally here." Daniel's stomach twisted. "Really?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. "Where?" Liam grinned and pointed toward the trees. Daniel didn't look immediately. He didn't want to let the man know he had seen him. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and quickly opened the camera. Then, with a slow, casual motion, he turned his head and snapped a photo. The man in the hoodie saw him, and then he turned around and walked away. Not fast, not running, just disappearing into the trees like he had never been there. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked down at Liam, who was still smiling. "He said it's almost time," Liam whispered. "He told me I should be ready soon." Daniel swallowed hard. He had just stopped something from happening tonight. But whoever that man was, he wasn't giving up. And Daniel knew one thing for sure. Liam wasn't safe. Daniel knew he had to act fast. Whoever that man was, he wasn't just some stranger passing by. He had been watching Liam, waiting. And now, Liam believed he was supposed to go with him. Daniel's fingers tightened around his phone. He had taken a photo of the man, but that wasn't enough. He needed proof. He needed to stop whatever was happening before it was too late. He turned to Liam, who was still smiling, unaware of the danger. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said, keeping his voice calm. "I need you to do something for me." Liam tilted his head. "What?" Daniel leaned in slightly. "Next time your dad talks to you, ask him where he wants to meet." Liam frowned. "Why?" Daniel forced the small chuckle. "I just think it'd be cool to know. So you're ready when he comes, right?" Liam seemed to think about it, then nodded. "Okay, I'll ask him tomorrow." Daniel exhaled. That was all he needed. If the man was truly speaking to Liam, feeding him lies, then he'd have to give a place, a time. And that would give Daniel something to work with. That night, Daniel sent the photo to a friend who worked in law enforcement. "See if you can find out who this is," he texted. The reply came fast. "I'll run it through our system. Be careful." Daniel barely slept. The next day, he arrived at the park earlier than ever. His eyes scanned every corner, every shadow. He couldn't let anything happen to Liam. Minutes later, Liam arrived. He smiled as he sat down, the same way he always did. Daniel watched closely. Liam tilted his head slightly, as if listening. Then he nodded. Daniel's heart pounded. He's hearing something. After a few moments, Liam turned to Daniel with a bright smile. "He told me where to meet him." Daniel forced himself to stay calm. "Yeah. Where?" Liam lowered his voice. "By the old train station. Tomorrow night. He said I should come alone." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. That was it. This wasn't just a game. Someone was trying to take this child. Daniel clenched his jaw. He had no time to waste. That night, he gave the information to his friend. The response was immediate. "The man in the photo has a record. Kidnapping attempt. He disappeared years ago." Daniel's hands shook as he read the message. He didn't need more proof. He knew exactly what was happening. The next night, Daniel wasn't the only one at the park. Hidden among the crowd were officers in plain clothes, watching, waiting. And just as Liam had said, when he arrived at the old train station, someone was waiting for him. The man in the hoodie stood in the shadows, his hands deep in his pockets. He took a step forward, motioning for Liam. But before he could take another step, freeze. Lights flashed. Officers swarmed in. The man turned to run, but it was too late. Within seconds, he was pinned to the ground, handcuffed. Liam stood frozen, confused, his small fingers clutching his baseball. "What's happening?" he whispered. Daniel walked over and knelt beside him. "It's okay, kid," he said gently. "You're safe now." Tears filled Liam's eyes. He looked at Daniel, as if finally realizing the truth. "My dad, he wasn't coming, was he?" Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "No, buddy, he wasn't." Liam wiped his face with his sleeve. Then, for the first time, he let go of the empty space beside him, and he held on to Daniel instead. The end.